I'm surprised that we think LLMs need a workflow engine.
The UIs are there. They're there today. And they exist for pretty much every property that people might want to interact with.
Now, imagine an agent that can drive a UI and simultaneously watch the requests going back and forth and just knows instantly what this API is doing.
APIs have been doing this stuff differently and in some cases better for a while now.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the API and Anchor, your favorite boozer where we get together and talk about stuff that's going on in the API landscape, really. Right, Martin?
That's exactly right. Thank you very much. That was an excellent introduction.
Oh.
And you're using a green mug.
I wonder how that's going to show out. We really are in a pub.
Well, you know, if that mug looks a little bit like it's got kind of a pub like on the front of it,
magical mug.
Then I really couldn't be bothered trying to edit it anymore.
No, it's fine.
So we'll see.
It'll be funny. It'll be what episode counts we now? Like 5?
This is episode 5, I think.
And if we get, I think we said if we get to 14, if we make it past 13, we're going to buy real tankards to celebrate the fact we're going to continue the show.
That was the magic number, or around about there, where if you do that many episodes, you're probably going to continue doing it. So it's worth investing in merch at that stage. So that's the plan. But welcome along. Thank you all for joining us. We appreciate you being here. We're going to talk about a couple of things today on a similar-ish topic, which is coming up again and again at the moment, which is kind of agentic usage of AI and LLM's ability to interact with sites and services on the behalf of other users. So the first thing we were going to get into was OpenAPI's, that's always going to trip me up, OpenAI's Operator, which came out towards the end of the year on the Pro plan, and people were kind of hyped about it. It was following on from where Claude had left us in that sort of fourth quarter of the year with their computer use release, which got everybody very excited about the kinds of things that could be achieved. And then Operator dropped and showed that it was taking it a step further, which was interesting because all of this so far is demonstrating that there is an ability to interact with actual websites and do things on behalf of actual users. And Josh sent me a tweet from Steve Sinofsky, who is the writer of the Hardcore Software newsletter, which you can find linked in the description below if you want to check it out. And Steve was musing a few things about what this means for use of software and users of software, and I think also for builders of websites and what that's going to actually mean now that this is becoming more of a thing. Josh, what are your thoughts on this from the top?
Well, oh God, where to start? But first of all, I think Steve Sinofsky would be a little disappointed with that, with him being known as the writer of Hardcore Software. He's perhaps a little more well known for being the leader of Office at Microsoft, and then the guy who fixed Windows Vista, if you remember that car crash, and did Windows 7. And actually, one of his best books, if you're interested, is he does a book called Writing is Thinking, I think, or something about that, about the art of writing. It's very good. A very clever guy, great writer, writes a lot. Actually, I'll dial this back a second, just specifically from Operator, if I can, to your old governor, since we're in a pub, we'll say that, Zed or Z, who did a presentation at Nordic about, AI being the death of APIs, was kind of the notion, which is where this is going, right? We can now deploy this Operator, and it can just go and use a website, and that opens up something of a holy grail that a lot of us have wanted for a while, which is the ability to sort of just use any old web property as an API. I remember a really interesting tool called Kimono back in the day that would try and scrape HTML and turn it into really nice to use REST APIs. I think it was called Kimono. I guess it makes sense, peek behind the kimono kind of thing. And that's Operators sort of making that dream look like a potential reality right now. Actually, my co-founder Nate, I know, just used Operator this morning to do something. He's like, wow, you got to try this in his personal life to automate something called car tax or something, I don't know. And I was very impressed. So yeah, it's definitely a thing that we now have line of sight of a real world where we can automate UIs somewhat effectively. And I think that is it's going to happen. I don't think there's any getting away from it. I think that's going to happen. Whether I think it's anywhere near optimal and at the sort of tail of scenarios, whether I think that's going to be how people build products for use by AI is a whole different conversation. UIs are hard to build. Like, they're really messy. It's really hard to do a good UI. It's so rare you see one that handles edge cases well. Whereas APIs are hard to build too, but I would argue a lot freaking easier. A lot easier. A lot more direct. And so I imagine, in the short term, we're going to use operators to do this with a lot of gotchas. Like, wow, are you really going to, as a big company, like a big bank, pick your favorite big bank, Bank of America, let's say. Mm-hmm. Are you really going to drive your automation by having an AI log in as a user and, behave on behalf of that user? That seems a little odd. Certainly, even when we extend out to the personal scenarios, like, is it optimal that I'm just giving this machine access to my particular credentials? That's a challenge. But I think it's going to happen. I think we're going to see a lot of that over the medium term. But for primary scenarios and for anything new being built in an agentic world, let's imagine this world where just agents are everywhere. Why would someone build a UI? Why would someone put the effort into that? It just doesn't make any sense to me. I think, we say this all the time. APIs are how AI gets work done. And there's definitely going to be a tranche of scenarios where they just automate the UI because it's too hard to build an API now. This thing's been around, it's legacy. But I feel it's going to be more legacy scenarios where there isn't an API. And I think going forward, what we're going to see is more and more focus on building agentic-friendly APIs, which I think we're going to talk about in a minute.
Yeah.
But that's my hot take. I still think this is, as an API company, I still think AI is great news for us. Quite the opposite of what folks are saying about Operator. And it being, or things like that being the end of APIs. I just don't buy it. The complexity is so unnecessary to have in the middle there. I think it'll be around because there's just some people are just not going to rewrite UIs into APIs. Definitely going to be a thing. Mm-hmm. But most scenarios, I think we're going to go towards building APIs that are ready for AI.
Yeah. The main consideration here as well is that people are building now, and companies are not necessarily building APIs in an agentic fashion fast enough for this to keep up. So of course they're going down the route of behaving as users and interacting with UIs because the UIs are there. They're there today, and they exist in this moment, and they exist for pretty much every property that people might want to interact with, which is definitely not the case for an API for all of those services, let alone an API that can do all of the things that are available on a company's website, whatever it happens to be. So, it makes sense to me that this is the situation we find ourselves in right now, because there's something to work with, and it's something that is understandable because there's a visual aspect to it, which is easier to plot out. There are patterns around UI and UX that are similar. You will click on a button to submit stuff. Forms look like forms, and they have fields. There are a lot of elements there that can be inferred, and that's true across a number of different sites. But when it comes to an API, all of that stuff needs to be defined. All of that needs a rule book almost for AI to follow, and that takes time to implement, and at this moment doesn't necessarily always match up with the expectation. You can have an API, yes, but is it so well documented, and does it have all of the different examples available for an LLM to understand? The answer to that is not always yes. And although there are moves towards being able to do more or better inference around documentation with things like LLMs.txt coming out, and also now with people adopting that as well. I've seen it go into a couple of different platforms as something that can make your documentation more readable via LLMs, basically by stripping out everything that isn't just the actual text, right? But all of this stuff takes the time, and that level of adoption isn't going to match up with the speed of uptake around things like Operator, where you're just going to be able to drop it into a website and have it do stuff for you. But you are absolutely right, and Steve's absolutely right, that there are challenges there. It does require a lot of the time the agent to act as you, because he's going to use your logins, unless you're going to go and start getting different logins for your operator agent to use, which in certain cases may not be possible. Banking is one of those, where you're not necessarily going to be able to have like a sub user available. But also at the same time, a lot of services don't offer that ability, right? To create sub users that can act on your behalf via a UI. But from an API point of view, that is possible. And a lot of companies do offer that, right? The ability to have separate API keys for machines, or just to be able to create sub users under an account, so you've got a bit more of that control. And again, that kind of leans into this idea of, actually, to a certain degree, some of the challenges that are going to be faced via this UI route are already mitigated by the fact that APIs have been doing this stuff differently, and in some cases better, for a while now. And we're just waiting for that kind of convergence to happen of the websites are available, the UIs are available, the APIs that deliver the same level of experience en masse and being available just need to take time to catch up. And then we're going to see a convergence there, I think, of where this stuff can go. In the agentic via API side of things will, I think, ultimately be the main approach, which is going to be the thing that drives this, do I even create UI at all in the end? Or are people just going to engage via some kind of agent or interface on top of an LLM?
I actually have another prediction here, which I haven't really seen discussed today. And that is, I think another part of the transition is going to be that actually what often happens is when you're using a website, that website is more often than not using an API underneath, but that API is not the same as the publicly documented one.
Yeah.
But it's far more capable than the UI gives you access to. I won't name names of services, but in some cases we have reverse engineered the API of our UI so that we can get some data out of our service providers that we can't get out of their dumb API, and we can't get out of the UI, but we know it's there and we can see it. Now, imagine an agent that can drive a UI and simultaneously watch the requests going back and forth and just knows instantly what this API is doing. And I think that's going to be a really strong application of agents, where they're going to be directly using the API you built for a UI, but it's still, API based. I think that's going to be a thing. It's going to be unstoppable. But yeah, I think you're right. I think we'll also see what has been the priority before is we create all the capabilities, more capabilities in the UI, and then there's the public API is some subset of those capabilities. I think we're going to see that flip-flop as, if this true idea of agents everywhere becomes a thing, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But it'll start by using the unpublished APIs.
Yeah. I'm all for that as well. I think for a long time, there's always been a disappointment of hoping that, certain functionality is going to be available via an API, and then when you actually get to the API, it isn't there.
And it's hard. It's also so hard to reverse engineer an API, an AI doing that, because an API. God damn it! Why couldn't these things be called different things?
I know, it's different names.
Couldn't they have come up with something other than OpenAI? Oh, yeah. I think the OpenAPI guy should change the name to something.
We can get
else
Steve Zinovsky to do it, because he fixed Windows Vista, so he solved that problem. So
he can fix anything. Yeah, interesting. Anyway, I guess you had another thing on this related topic, right? About the
So I mean, there's a lot in terms of how this moves forward and the kinds of things that need to be adopted in order to speed things up, right? It's taking a little while longer for this to become a thing from the API point of view, simply because of the effort involved in it. But I noted something yesterday that was floating around on the interwebs about a company that's coming out of YC called Wildcard AI, who had put out as open source something called Agents.json, which just struck me because we've spoken previously about LLMs.txt being, an approach to delivering very simplistic documentation that can be understood by LLMs, and that's great, makes a lot of sense in that case. So I checked out what Agents.json was, and I saw that they were looking to build something that helps to define API workflows so that LLMs can have a better understanding of how to go down the routes of achieving things with APIs, because their service does that kind of thing. They are effectively connecting various different services together so that you can engage with all your services via one place and present it out into the world. So I was like, okay, well, that sounds like something interesting. So I checked it out, and it was an interesting concept, very much based around the idea of using, OpenAPI and the approach that was defined within it. But there was no mention there at all of the Arazzo specification, which came out last year and is the OpenAPI initiative's definition of what a API workflow should look like. So I'm not going to say chaos ensued, because it certainly didn't, but it was pointed out to them very quickly that this was a thing by Frank Kilcommons from Smart Bear, who's also done a video on this channel talking about this very thing with
we
you
know Frank
before.
Yep.
And I think that this sort of whole aspect goes to highlight that there's probably not as much awareness around this kind of thing, or standardization around workflows and the aspects that are needed to be put in place as maybe there should be. Because I'm going to give the Wildcard AI founders a little bit of the benefit of the doubt and say that they probably didn't know that this is a thing. And when they were putting together Agents.json, thought, oh, do you know what? Actually, one step beyond OpenAPI would be if we could do this in steps, which is, effectively what Arazzo had already outlined. But, that sort of awareness and the tooling behind it is only just starting to bubble up at this point. And I think it really needs to start moving quite a lot faster if this convergence that we're hoping is going to happen is actually going to manifest.
Yeah, I agree. I think it'd be interesting to get some of these folks on the channel actually to talk about it. Whether they come to the API Anchor or not, and it'd be our first guest, I don't know, but I'd be curious. It's quite funny looking at the Wildcard AI repo now. It has one issue that you should show on screen that is now closed. That was Frank and legend of the API space, the API evangelist Kin Lane, commenting and saying support Arazzo. Yeah, but I'll be honest, I don't think anyone knows about Arazzo yet. It's very, very, it's very early. I mean, let's be totally honest and say most people don't know about OpenAPI. Most people I run into are still calling the damn thing Swagger, which drives me nuts. So we shouldn't be too surprised that no one's heard of Arazzo with it being so fresh out of the the barn. Yeah, interesting. I mean, it's commendable what they're trying to do at Wildcard AI. I mean, hopefully they do the right thing now and go and partner up with Arazzo and use that instead. It seems to indicate that they're going to look at that when they close the issue with their response.
Yeah.
But it was short-lived.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. And, one could look at it as some sort of land grab on the space, which is lots of going on in AI right now, right? If you can be the standard for any of this stuff, I mean, there's just so much bluster around AI that is not surprising. But I think you're absolutely right to give them the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, might be interesting to get them on and talk to them actually about this wildcard thing. It looks kind of interesting. I think there is in our world as well. It's it's very interesting from an API perspective, given all that we've just talked about, as we see more and more happening in this agentic tooling landscape.
Yeah, I think that there is a need for a greater level of awareness around things like Arazzo, and I'd say that there's probably a lot more that needs to be done around raising that awareness. But then it also feels like there needs to be something more defined on the whole than there is today. So far it's a specification. And
it needs to solve some problems first, and no disrespect to Frank and team. I think it took Swagger a while to realize its value. It started out as like a docs tool, right? Let's be honest, that's how it was used. And now there's so much open source tooling built around Swagger and OpenAPI that its value is like really around the whole life cycle of APIs. It's kind of really grown up. I was shocked actually when I came back into the industry after a little break working at Facebook and so on. Arazzo is just not there yet. It's not well known, but it's also just not really found its gravitas of deployment. Maybe this is it. Maybe the agents thing is 100% it. I'll be honest, I'm a little bit surprised. Candid hot take here. We definitely should get Frank into the pub. I think, we both know Frank a little bit from being on the API circuit. I'm surprised that we think LLMs need a workflow engine. I think they would. I genuinely think, especially as they evolve, they're not going to need a ton of information about these APIs. They're not going to need as much guidance as a human would be. I would imagine if it's reasonably well documented, they'll work out how to use Stripe without an Arazzo, even just off a decently written OpenAPI doc. I may be wrong, but I'm not sure. I think we might be underestimating them a bit. I'd be curious what the pushback on that statement would be.
Yeah, I mean, if you feel like you want to push back or jump on that particular take, feel free to do so in the comments down below. But what I will say is that we're still at a point where use case driven documentation doesn't exist as much as it needs to, and a lot of times when people are heading towards trying to achieve something with an API, they're coming at it from a use case point of view, right? Like, here is a number of different things that I want to achieve. And commonly you don't find that stuff set out as much as you would maybe need in order to actually achieve it. So there's a lot of thinking and figuring things out that you end up going through as a developer when you're trying to reach your use case. Actually, going down the route of defining use cases in your documentation would, in my head, subvert the need for any kind of workflow definition, right? Because you're effectively saying, here is the playbook for achieving this use case. Now, I'm pretty certain that at this stage, AI can understand that, right? So if that's presented, you can use LLMs.txt to do it in a really nice way if you want. And that presentation should be all that's necessary then. You've got an API reference, an OpenAPI document ready to go, and a use case documented in like plain text, markdown, or something that can be understood. That combination really should be enough. And I'm now talking about it enough where I'm like, I'm actually going to go and test that.
Yeah, you should. Bear in mind, Operator's doing most of what it's doing without reading any docs. So we'll see where this goes. It's interesting to see if it's actually necessary. Can I just do a little mention here, a little plug actually?
Absolutely.
So we are hiring at Zooplo. So much so, I'm actually late for an interview right now, Martin. So I'm going to have to call this short.
It's time to finish your drink.
Sorry if the candidate is watching that video, but I got to drop. So I'm going to talk us out. Wind us down, Martin.
No problem. And if you're looking for any of those roles, then you can find them on the website at zooplo.com/careers. Feel free to check them out. Thanks very much, Josh. We'll see you again soon. And thank you very much for joining us here in the API and Anchor. If you have any thoughts or opinions on anything we've discussed here today, feel free to drop them in the comments below, and we will be following up on this throughout the year, I'm sure, as it is a very hot topic. So join us again soon. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. Thanks very much.
And ding ding from my magical mug, probably.
That's so magical.